I wish it wouldn't do that. Good morning, Stella O'Malley.
Hello there.
I'm here with the, I'd say famous because that's true, psychologist Stella O'Malley on our semi-regular broadcast, Breaking the Barriers. You might say that Stella doesn't require anyone to break the barriers. She's well known and featured in the media. However, we did discover when we tried to advertise this cast on Facebook that Stella's name triggered an automatic ban. So she's even a worse thought criminal than most of the people I've dealt with. That's pretty bad. But anyway, Stella, good morning. Lovely to see you. Let's just start with, who is Stella O'Malley? Where are you from, Stella?
Well, I'm from Blanchardstown in Dublin, and just to be clear, I'm a psychotherapist, not a psychologist. It's a difference, you know. We psychotherapists, we focus on the challenges in living, while psychologists, I would argue, are more interested in diagnosis and the impact of diagnosis. And actually, some people would believe that a psychotherapist is a poor man's psychologist, but I wouldn't, because I'm not really very into the diagnosis culture. I'm very wary of it, and I'm not keen on it. Secondly, about my triggering a ban, you know, I feel in this strange era we're living in at the moment, I kind of think it's almost a badge of honor to be considered a thought criminal today, because there's so much extraordinary spin and branding and dishonesty. And I think we need more people who are speaking up. I think it's really important.
Dissent is vital. And of course, if you haven't triggered a ban, you're not doing it right. You're not dissenting.
Or you're probably missing out on the fact that society has taken a very the political world has taken a very significant swerve in recent years. And, you know, we've always lived in strange times. We've always lived in troubled times. You know, every era thinks theirs is the most strange. However, self-censorship is a particular issue in our era. And so the censorship from global media is also an issue. So I think it's important that people acknowledge that rather than feel that there's something wrong with what I'm saying. I would say it's more important to kind of listen to the content of what anybody is saying before you figure out whether you've decided that they're dangerous or not.
Being dangerous is probably a good thing. I was going to say on the self-censorship, there's very good reasons why people might self-censor at the moment, given the level of cancellation, the destruction of livelihoods triggered by even the most relatively innocuous statements, are things that would have 10 years ago been considered absolutely sense.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. It's not that the world has collectively suddenly moved their political sensibilities in the last 10 years. What's happened is that the ability to say your political, you know, beliefs on any given, you know, issue, any given hot topic, hot button issue, but suddenly our ability to speak about it has been prevented and you know, massively curtailed, I would say. I remember just on that point about being dangerous, because it's such an extraordinary word. But to anybody who's a psychotherapist who uses scented candles and cushions in their working day. But I remember when I first discovered Jordan Peterson, and like, I love some of what Jordan Peterson says, and I don't agree with the others, but I think the fact that I have to add that sentence is a reflection of a weird society. Of course, I don't agree. I don't even agree with everything my husband says. What the hell would I agree with some Canadian psychologist?
I don't always agree with myself. So
yeah, I was going to say that. But to go back, yeah, I remember when I first discovered Jordan Peterson. I know exactly when it was. It was January 2018. And he was speaking out, you know, it was a viral clip that he'd been speaking out, and it must have been a year or two previously, about the compelled speech that was happening in Canada, and, you know, the bill C-16, I think it was called. And quite a few people messaged me, but one particular who I really rated, messaged me to tell me he was dangerous. And I remember looking, going, a psychologist is dangerous? How interesting. And I said, what's dangerous about him? I was really like all agog, like, tell me. I was so naive, like, go on then, spill. And she came back with a lot of vague oh, I don't know, but read this article. And it was an article about him. And I said, oh, no, no, no. I was being naive, but also perhaps a little bit reflective of myself, that I didn't want to read about him. I wanted to read his words. Show me the real deal.
That's the right thing to do, to
Yeah,
read his words, see what
yeah.
he's, rather than have it filtered for you by someone else.
This very erudite, well thought out individual couldn't produce anything of him. She could only produce comment on him. And it was my first moment where I went, oh, it's very strange. Well, it's strange. She has nothing on him. It's only comment that he's dangerous. And I think it was a canary in a coal mine for me of what was going down.
And that brings us directly to your own work with Genspect. You must, first of all, can you tell us our audience, what Genspect is?
Yeah. Genspect is an organization, international organization, and our mission is to promote a healthy approach to sex and gender. And we do this by offering a non-medicalized approach to gender-related distress. That's where our focus lies. We're very, very concerned about WPATH and the way the WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and they consider they're the self-identified world authority on gender issues. However, their MO is to fast track everybody who wants it, no matter what age, and that's an actual quote, no matter what age, it could be as young as they want, onto a medicalized route, if that's what they wish. And that medicalized route carries a very heavy burden on the body, creates a litter of complications for the body, literally takes years off your life, and will, by the way, have a massive impact on various health systems across the world, because we're talking about a huge medicalized raft of people who have weakened their bodies and will require medicalization for the rest of their life. It's an extraordinary cost to it, but that's not why we're bothered about it. Why we want to do it is we want a healthy approach, and we don't believe it's a healthy approach to fast track young vulnerable people onto a medicalized route for their identity. We've never medicalized identities before. It's the first era choosing to medicalize identities, and it is an extraordinary, interesting concept. Why would you medicalize your identity? Why can't you just develop and evolve your identity? And it's we what?
Your body is somehow sick and wrong because it doesn't correspond with what you think it should. It is, in a sense, the equivalent of offering Ozempic to anorexics, to people with anorexia nervosa, isn't it?
And liposuction. Some of these interventions are very, very invasive, and some of them are irreversible. And it's treating a psychological issue with a physical problem. Now, many people believe that medical transition and the urge to medically transition is somehow akin to being gay. Frankly, that doesn't hold water for maybe 10 seconds thought, because being gay doesn't require medicalization. For starters, it doesn't require that you remove body parts. It doesn't require any intervention. You just are gay. While medical transition, being trans, requires, for those who need it, a significant level of medical, whether it's hormones, it can be mastectomies, it can be phalloplasty, vaginoplasty. This is quite extreme body, life-changing interventions. And so we reject that idea.
Genspect rejects this. You offer care that isn't medicalized, because that also, you mentioned that WPATH, the World Professional Association, and gender, but that's not actually a professional organization at all. The vast majority of people involved are actually trans activists.
Yeah. So in our work, we are highlighting things like gender nonconformity is perfectly fine. Let the boy run around in a dress if he wants to. Let the girl wear whatever she wants. We're wary of things like binding, which it sounds like something from Africa or China in the old days, but a lot of young girls are binding their breasts these days. But because it deforms the breast and it causes great pain, we're very cautious around binding, and we don't advocate for it. And we're also very concerned about tucking, which is when men tuck in, or young boys or teenagers tuck their penis and their testicles in, And that again causes great pain and has huge physical ramifications. So we don't condone that. But in general, gender nonconformity, we don't care about. Wear whatever makeup you want, whatever clothes you wear. As J.K. Rowling said in her famous tweet in, I think, 2021, wear whatever you please, you know, and have sex with any consenting adult you want to have. But there's no need, arguably, to medicalize these young people who have high levels of autism and high levels of other comorbidities such as anorexia and ADHD.
And on this, you are effectively at loggerheads with WPHEH. And Michael Schellenberger revealed...
Oh, yeah. Sorry, you asked me. Yes. So
discussions in the last year. That's a huge vindication for Genspect, of course.
Yeah, we've been working. It's amazing. We invited Michael Schellenberger to speak at our conference in Denver, because what we do, one of the many things we do in Genspect is we follow WPATH around the world. They brought about the hashtag no debate, and we said, yeah, we will have debate actually. And the way we'll have it is we're going to have conferences wherever you have conferences in the same city and at the same time. And so when they had a conference in Killarney, we had a conference in Killarney in Ireland. When they had a conference in Denver last November, so did we. And we're having another one in Lisbon, Portugal. I hope to see you there. It's going to be brilliant. It's going to be really good. Amazing speakers. It's in September. But in the one in Denver in November, we invited Michael Schellenberger to speak. And he's a leading thinker. You know, he's a very, very interesting man. And he had in his possession the WPATH files, which was some information that was leaked to him by a whistleblower about private conversations among WPATH members. And what was revealed in the WPATH files, we worked with Michael very extensively from November onwards, right up until they were finally released in March. And we were very proud and honoured to be part of this, and we're continuing to work with Michael Schellenberger and beyond, because his organisation, Environmental Progress, they're phenomenal, the work that they do, and they're moving to a new name, Civilization Works. So that's quite exciting. But actually, can you
Schellenberger is, of course, one of America's top investigative journalists. He's a relentless, fantastic investigator, and scrupulously fair, it has to be said.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's a genuinely brilliant man, and he's a really deep thinker. And what he's looking for is a better society, quality.
What came out in these files? What did
we
find?
So what came out in the WPATH files revealed that WPATH is not a professional organisation, and it's not a medical organisation. And actually, the activists have infiltrated and overtaken this organisation. They were always a strong presence, but now they're leading the way. And so we had things like conversations from a surgeon who was seeking standards of care or guidelines on any level for nullification procedures. And nullification means you're basically nullifying, it's basically turning a body into a Barbie doll or an action man, so that there'd be nothing there. Also, this same surgeon was looking for guidelines for, he said, procedures that are not known in nature. For example, a phallus retaining vaginoplasty. So somebody wanted to retain their penis and their testicles and have a vaginoplasty. But this man was told, this surgeon was told by WPATH members that this was heteronormative to be seeking guidelines because it wasn't appropriate. Yeah, the guidelines in themselves, guidelines were heteronormative, and he shouldn't be seeking them. Further stories was... What?
Do anything.
Yeah.
In whatever you do, create things. Don't look to guidelines.
No, because that's the old style of thinking. That's a heteronormative way of thinking. Now we're in a queer way of thinking. That's not the way we think. You do as you please, basically, and you don't look to guidelines, because guidelines is an old-fashioned way. There was also another clinician who spoke about giving surgical genital interventions to somebody who was homeless and schizophrenic. And we know, anybody who knows anything about homeless people would know they wouldn't have the ability to take the physical care that's needed after these surgeries. We had quite clear evidence that the children that they are working with did not understand the implications of things like infertility. For example, they talked about growing their breast back if they changed their mind, not realizing that once you've had a mastectomy, you won't be able to grow your breast back. They didn't understand it. They also showed that they didn't understand infertility, and regret was already present. And so one clinician very dismissively talked about a few children who came to regret their lack of fertility as a result of all these interventions. And he said, you know, the dog isn't cutting it for them anymore. So they had said that they'd get a dog, and you know, I know it's so cavalier. The leaked files. It's an extraordinary piece of reading. I really recommend people going on to Michael Schellenberger's website and reading the WPATH files. Not only that, but Mia Hughes, who's become a great friend and a colleague of myself, she wrote a report with the WPATH files, and in that she details other medical scandals, and she shows just how common it is.
I know one of the things was they had dealings with children with dissociative personality disorder, and they were willing to accommodate all of the personalities physically in the body by altering the body.
Yes, and the idea was the WPATH showed itself to be very, very conscious about lawsuits and about insurance. And so, for example, somebody with, dissociative identity disorder, which is frankly a pseudo-diagnosis, it's pseudo-scientific, multiple personalities, been pretty much debunked since the 90s, that we have all these personalities within each other and you can speak in tongues and stuff. You know, there's very little evidence for it. Anyway, apparently, you could see the clinicians were advised to get consent from all the personalities for fear of future litigation. It's like clown world. To be honest, that's what I would see it as. And not only that, I want to point out that WPATH, they released the standards of care in 2022, and you know, their standards of care, they're using it as a moniker. Standards of care, you actually have to reach certain criteria to be called as standards of care. They don't reach that criteria, but they call it it's a real case of just break the rules and just carry on. And in those standards of care, they removed all age restrictions for fear of being sued, because you can see it in internal conversations. That's why they removed it. And so that means a mastectomy could be at any age. And I know people, I've met them.
A mastectomy at any age?
Yeah. So a girl who's 13, who I know, she's not 13 now, she's in her 20s. She had a mastectomy at 13. It's like, when you get into the depths of what is actually going on, you watch some actual awful tragedies have happened. You know, Chloe Cole, one of the most famous detransitioners, she had a mastectomy at 14, if I'm right. You know what I mean? Like, it's just shocking. But not only that, they never use the word experimental once in the WPATH Standards of Care of 2022. It's version 8. And they do that for a reason, because if they use the words experimental, insurance companies would not be able to insure. And so they don't use it. However, all of these treatments are experimental. We have never blocked sexual development in a young person before. So we don't know. This is a short-term intervention that keeps them happy in the moment and does not keep them happy in the long term for the most part. This is really highly experimental. But they don't use the word so that they'll get insurance.
If you block puberty in a child, there are not just physical effects, but there's psychological, psychiatric effects as well. You know, it's an intervention.
It's an incredibly authoritarian intervention. And one day we will look back in this period and think, what were we doing to block the human, development, the sexual development of an adolescent is such an extraordinarily high-handed thing to do. But if you think about it, when you experience a sexual awakening between the ages of roughly 10 and 20, with that sexual awakening comes a yearning for a mate, to fall in love. You look to poetry and music and films in a way that you don't as a child. Your brain is complexifying because you're understanding that it's not, when you're 10, it's like, I want the cake, I want the sweets, I want the toy, me. Then between 10 and 20, your brain complexifies and you realize, I need to be attractive for a mate. I need social skills. I need to learn to not only fall in love, but to be, to be lovable as such. So there's a huge amount of emotional and social and cognitive development that takes place with this sexual awakening. And to block it creates a limbo for the child, who remains in a childlike state, who never has this sexual awakening and all the synapses that kind of go off as a result. They never have that. And then the protocol is then they go into a synthetic puberty at 18. So they're completely out of sync with their peers. If you take puberty blockers and you're a boy, your penis remains in the child size, and it doesn't grow. And so when you're 13 or 14, that mightn't matter. By the time you're 16 or 17, you're out of sync. Not only that, you haven't grown any hair, you haven't grown any facial hair or chest hair or broadened your body in any level. With girls, you haven't had any breast development, you haven't had any menstruation, you haven't had any pubic hair. And then at 18, you're moved into a synthetic chemical puberty of the opposite sex. And that in itself, to never undergo biological natural puberty, but to instead have a chemical puberty, we know enough about chemicals to know it's not the same. So
yes.
So what is actually happening? What?
The body isn't producing the hormones involved here. They're being injected, and they are not the hormones the body is expecting, are they?
Exactly. So you're bringing in an influx of a foreign hormone into your body. And it's very notable that, the body starts to reject these hormones, and that's why there's so many complications, and that's why it's such a heavy burden on the body. So testosterone on females, the first few years, frankly, it's like cocaine. It's really, really good. The energies are high. Your libido is sky high. Your often they talk about confidence and they talk about decisive. It's almost like it's hilariously gender based. If you want me, like it sounds like stereotypes, but these are the reports. However, they also say they more prone to violence, more angry. There's no doubt about that. However, after a few years, the body seems to reject it. There's a very high number of urinary tract infections, very high number of pain around the vagina. And it comes to a point where the orgasms become very painful. And so from having a very high libido, you don't actually want to have an orgasm because it's too painful. So that's a real issue. And then further than that, the massive levels of infection around the vagina and stuff leads to the person needing either vaginoplasty and also a hysterectomy about 5 years in. Not always, but there's a high number of people who have so many issues in their genitals as a result of testosterone. It's clearly it's putting diesel in the petrol tank, and it takes time to take the impact, but it does impact.
What effectively is being done to these children is they're deprived of their ordinary natural humanity development and human development, and then it's replaced with an artificial chemical induced one, which has horrible effects on the body.
Yeah.
And that brings us, of course, straight to, because these are experimental, to the Cass report, Hilary Cass's report into transgender medicine in Britain. Now, I know that WPATH made a submission, which they insisted that none of this was experimental, and but they haven't commented as far as I know so far. What did the Cass report say, and what is the effect of it?
Thank you for bringing this up. So for anybody who's listening, who is almost guiltily listening because they believe that we're some sort of heretics and that we're dangerous people, I want to point out that, like, the WPATH files were sent to Michael Schellenberger. He had nothing to do with gender. He was interested in climate change and homelessness. And so he came as a neutral observer saying, look at this is really crazy. And he immediately got denigrated and called dangerous immediately as soon as he came out with the WPATH files. Hilary Cass is a paediatrician, very eminent in the UK. She is 40 years standing, really, really high standing. And she was asked as a neutral, she had no experience in gender, as neutral, well-qualified, eminent paediatrician to examine gender-based treatment for children and adolescents in the UK. And she and her team are, what?
child medicine is her field of expertise, and she was asked to examine child medicine.
What did you say?
The child medicine was her area of
Yeah,
expertise, and this
exactly.
is what she examined.
Exactly. So she was asked to study it, and she and her team carried out. She thought it was going to be, a few afternoons a week for about 6 months or so, and she was going into retirement, and she's thinking, this has been interesting. It didn't turn out that way. It turned out to be 4 years full time. She's never worked so hard in her life with a team full time. I spoke to her many times on behalf of Genspect, and we have a few organizations, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. And we gave different kind of presentations around what was the work we were doing and the issues we were highlighting around this. But after 4 years of meticulous research by Dr. Hilary Cass and her team, they came out with the Cass report. And the Cass report was released about a few weeks ago, so April 2024. And it showed that there is insufficient evidence to carry out medicalization on children or adolescents or vulnerable adults. That this was experimental. Of course, it's experimental medicine, and that it doesn't have a strong evidence base. Not only that, but there was issues around the affirmative care model. And the affirmative care model came in like, a rocket about 10 years ago. And it's kind of, again, making the mistake that being trans is somehow like being gay. So the idea was you just affirm. And it's like, well, you're affirming into a lifelong, chemical reliance. You're affirming into a kind of a medicalization of the body. So the Cass
This is
report was,
care, gender affirming care.
yeah. So
That's
that's
big. It's the term they keep beating us over the head with.
Yeah, gender affirming care is the term that everybody seems to have settled on. And gender affirming care is something that just arrived along with everything to do with gender about 10 years ago. And when you start looking into WPATH, because all roads lead to WPATH, they are the HQ of gender, you realize this is an extremely well-funded organization with a huge amount of polished documents, massive research documents, huge amount of money behind it. And you realize sometimes some of these events and terms and concepts that they have basically promoted, they just arrive into public consciousness, and you're thinking, where did that come from? Where did this concept, like, had I spoken about gender affirming care to you 10 years ago, you would have said, sorry, what? You never would have heard of it. But you never had heard of non-binary either. You hadn't heard of many things to do with this. And so gender affirming care, the idea is that, again, no matter what age the child is, you affirm their identity. And therapists, rather than offering a therapeutic process, which has value, where we would work together to collaborate with the patient to figure out their choices and the different decisions they want to make, and support and help them to kind of look at the different options, rather than offering a therapeutic process, therapists are demoted into the position of being facilitators. So we facilitate medical transition.
Just say yes.
Yeah. Because that keeps them happy in the moment. And being in the moment is the happiness in the moment is the kind of great North Star in gender affirming treatment. If they're happy, the kids are happy, if they're happy. But anybody who has kids, and I have kids, knows, it's quite easy for me to keep my kids happy. I could throw them chocolate and say, let's go to McDonald's after school, forget about doing schoolwork. It's easy to keep a kid happy.
Homework's out.
Yeah.
No more homework.
It's very easy to keep a child happy, but it's not good for them in the long run. And so it's that is the difference between gender affirmative care and conventional psychotherapy.
So that's a huge. So Cass, after 4 years, intense work, says this is experimental. There's no evidence.
And it was, there's 9 studies in the document, in the kind of 388 page report, and 8 of them are systematic reviews on different kind of aspects of gender affirming care. And after studying it, they came up with the idea that there is insufficient evidence for any of this. And so the NHS have now blocked the use of puberty blockers. Thank God they banned puberty blockers, except in the case of clinical trials. However, Genspect takes the position that it's like Bertrand Russell's, China teapot. You could seek evidence that there's a China teapot circling the sun. Okay. However, it'll be very hard to disprove that. And so the burden of proof relies upon the person who are making the radical claims. And so I would argue, and so Genspect argued, that if you're going to carry out these radical interventions, the burden of proof is on the clinicians who are carrying them out, rather than people like us who say, it's irreversible, it's reckless, and it's experimental. You need some proof. They say disprove it. And I'm like, no. They need to prove it. We've got the wrong burden of proof here.
Yeah. They need to prove that this works for kids, that this in the long happy, well-balanced, healthy adults.
And may I say, there's one aspect, one of the reasons why I've become so absorbed in gender is I had, as a child, I had my own intense experiences, and I wanted to be a boy for many years. Left that behind. I had a sexual awakening, and I became comfortable in my own body ultimately. And life moved on. I didn't become a psychotherapist until I was in my 30s. And when I worked in psychotherapy, I wasn't interested in gender or medical transition or anything like that. I was just a general psychotherapist. And I was very interested in parenting and teenagehood. And I wrote a few books around that. Always knew once the trans issue reared its head that I had something to contribute. So I wrote an article in 2017 saying I could have been one of those kids. And those kids that we're hearing about, because I had my experience, and it lasted for many, many years. The big phrase in gender is if it's insistent, persistent, and consistent. I was insistent, persistent, and consistent for years. And so I said I could have been that, but I grew out of it. And now I know my research. I didn't know it at the time. I was classic. I had a classic case of gender dysphoria, childhood onset, grew out of it during my sexual awakening. Everything about that is very typical, and up to
gender affirming care would attract you.
Yeah,
gender affirming care would attract you in that, wouldn't it? Because you wouldn't have had awakening,
and
you wouldn't
up to like 80-90% of children who are like me, who have gender issues as a child, they do become comfortable in their own body. But this new generation, these stats are going to get skewed, because this new generation have the offer of getting their puberty blocked. They never have the sexual awakening, and so they never get the opportunity to become comfortable in their own skin. And so when I did as a result of this article I wrote for the Sunday Indo in 2017, I wrote it. I was invited to do a film for Channel 4 called Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. And the premise of the film was that could any of the 4,000% rise in female teenagers seeking medical transition, could any of them be like me? Because I grew out of it. That's all the premise was because any of them.
1,000% rise.
Now, if there's a 4,000% rise in the sale of Mars bars, you'd want to do an inquiry. What the hell is going on when there's a 4,000% rise? It's an extraordinary, it's unfathomable rise. Yeah. And could any of them be like me? That was the premise. What's going on, really? Okay. And for that, I did this film called Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk in 2018. And for that, I was vilified. It was a baptism of fire. I was called transphobic. Complaints were made against my my accreditation body. I was slated online by many different people, stalked by one guy in particular. And, everywhere I went, I'm often on the radio. Every single time I'm on the radio, they contact the radio saying, why are you getting that transphobe to speak? She's a bigot. If I speak in schools, it follows me around. And so because the extraordinary, violent, pernicious, dishonest campaign against me to help to try and prevent me from speaking up, because as a direct result of that, I've remained speaking up. Funnily enough, had they let me just say it, I think I'd have moved on. I would have moved on. I've gone into other subjects before and get really into it. I was very into the free range kids movement and things like that. But I was allowed to say my point. People disagreed with it. Of course they did. But they didn't do that sort of weird smear campaign. And the smear campaign against me has been very, very extensive. And as a result, I keep on speaking up. They've had the wrong result with me.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, I think it sparks in some people a very strong reaction of, well, now I'm definitely going to speak up.
Yeah, it's what my sister calls the mule reaction. If we're beaten, we go harder. That campaign, you can be brave about it. It must have hurt. As you said, it was a baptism of fire. You were not expecting this.
Well, I was expecting it insofar as I'd watched the treatment. I'd watched in 2018 as we were making the film how insane the trans activists were. And even before, when I was offered to do the film, I remember I asked a few of my friends, it's 2017, it feels like, aeons ago, but I remember asking my friends, should I do it? And one and all of them said, don't. The only person who said, yeah, do it was my husband. He was like, yeah, go for it. But
with the support you really needed.
Yeah.
Going to have a campaign against you, having the husband on side is a great help.
Yeah. It has been. He has been amazing. So I expected it, and yet experiencing it was very, very disorientated, even though I expected it. And it was hurtful, but it was enraging. I tell you what it was more than anything, it was terrifying. Because it was really, really frightening to see that your work could be misrepresented and lied about on a very systematic way, and that you could end up with a very bad reputation. And arguably I did in some circles, and they literally don't know what you're saying. They've got the wrong impression of your work. It's a horrible feeling. To be misrepresented is horrible.
They don't read your work. They read the commentary by insane trans activists.
Yeah.
It's organized in a really pernicious way. It's not one, it's like teams of people in various places coming at you.
Yeah.
That had to be hard. As a professional, it's really difficult to see your work treated like that.
Yeah, I think it's maddening. And I use the word specifically, it's maddening to watch your work and your thoughts and your very person to be misrepresented and to be lied about. It's really, really a horrible thing to experience. And it's continued to this day. I think the word transphobic has lost a lot of power, but at the same time, I've also been attacked on a very extensive level from the kind of extremists on the other side as well, who've also lied about my work and misrepresented me. So this would be kind of extremist radical feminists, extremist kind of women's rights, kind of extremists and zealots, and they've also misrepresented my work, and they also attack me, and they're very similar. They're like a mirror image, to be honest. They do use very similar tactics, and they kind of come up with some fairly hilarious ideas, such as like, who funds Genspect? And I'm like, knock yourselves out figuring out that one, because there isn't much money there.
Yeah, you really do wish that there was one of those great big funding organizations somewhere. Yeah.
Well, that brings me to the point. WPATH and all the Planned Parenthood, the Stonewalls, these are funded out beyond your wildest imagination, their funding. And I've followed this. It's very, very interesting about the funding. I've kind of studied it quite intensely. And our side are really, really, we're very grassroots. It's an awful lot of work, an awful lot of unpaid work. And there is some paid work. Of course, I get paid sometimes. You know what I mean? I do work very hard, and I don't make any apologies for getting paid. But the lopsided fight, the David and Goliath of this, there's no doubt who's getting funded. You know what I mean? And it's extraordinary.
Look at the organizations and at what's being done. That said, the CAS report, the WPATH files had to be out, but the CAS report had to feel like an enormous vindication of your work and Genspect's work.
Yeah. The CAS report came out with exactly what Genspect came out with 3 years previously, which is there is not enough evidence to support these radical interventions. More care, compassion, and caution is required. So it was a vindication of everything we stand for. And it was very satisfying and saddening, because a lot of people have been harmed. We established in June 21 3 years later, the CAS report came out. And basically, they have researched everything that we were aware of. For example, you remember I was talking about how, I kind of became more entrenched in gender because of all the attacks and the science of debate. One thing about gender that is kind of frightening is it shines a light on lots of other issues. For example, it shone a light on shoddy academics and how academia has lost its way, and so much of the research that apparently purports to support gender affirming care, it doesn't support it. So the research might say something along the lines of, and so it's inconclusive whether the gender affirming care helped. And they will rewrite it and say, massive support and vindication for gender affirming care. Let's go. So they rewrite it and they leap to conclusions that are illogical and don't make sense. And the bad scientific method was exposed with the Hillary CAS. But by reading the reports, you could do it yourself. You know what I mean? We had read the report, so it wasn't new information, but now it's been vindicated by this team of independent researchers.
Independent researchers, it's out there in the public view. This is not evidence-based medicine. That's the big thing, isn't it?
No,
where do we go? What happens now?
Yeah. I think what we need to do is just revert to the very well-established, least invasive first approach. So that if somebody comes to a doctor with a headache, the doctor doesn't immediately suggest brain surgery. Instead, they say, well, we'll start with water, maybe a walk. Are you feeling stressed? Maybe a headache tablet. And you get increasingly interventionist as the pain doesn't go away. So this is very well established, least invasive first. That's the approach. And in a gender world, because a lot of people presume it's like being gay, they dispense with all of that. And instead they would say, okay, if you feel that you are trans, you should immediately block your puberty, or if you're older, have cross-sex hormones, or perhaps have genital surgery or mastectomies. So they go for most invasive first, irreversible interventions immediately.
Irreversible interventions at the start. That's what gender affirming care means, isn't it?
Yeah. It's, well, whatever, no, to be actually accurate, whatever the client wants. It's client-led and patient-led. So if the patient wants it, they get it. If they don't want it, they don't get it. But if they want it, they get it. So whatever. So this has moved from, first...
to know what they want.
Yeah.
How are they even aware of what's available? They couldn't be.
Yeah. So it's moved...
Your clients and your patients are children. An extraordinary statement.
It is, and we've never done it before. Like we definitely work with patients, but we don't let the patients lead. So if the patient thinks that they have a pain and the patient suggests what treatment no, that's kind of dismissing the expertise of the experts. But part of this is extraordinary move from first do no harm to buyer beware, and it's a consumer-led healthcare industry. That is, it's the American healthcare industry. It's if you can pay for it, you get it. If you've got insurance for it, you get it. It's about your economic situation as opposed to your health challenges. And so that, like I say, gender lifts up lots of things. It lifted up shoddy academia. It's also lifted up a consumer healthcare system and the weaknesses around that, because suddenly the patient has moved into being a customer. And the customer is always right. And so, like I say, it's turned into buyer beware. And some of these people, and Genspect, like I said earlier, Genspect has a few, loads of different initiatives. So we offer a non-medicalized approach to gender distress, and that's the gender framework. And that will be peer reviewed and released officially in Lisbon in September. But we also have guidances for clinicians, for teachers, for pediatricians, and parents and families. But we also, as well as that, we have a few kind of separate kind of sister organizations or projects that we run. And one of them is called Beyond Trans, where we offer therapeutic support groups for people who've been harmed by medical transition. We offer one-to-one subsidised funding for therapy for detransitioners and people who've been harmed by medical transition. These are people who medically transitioned as a result of gender-affirming care, came to regret it, tried to stop the process, and the ability of a girl who has had her puberty blocked or even just went on to cross-sex hormones at 18. She's completely masculinized. She has facial hair, she has body hair, she has chest hair, she has hair on her bum, and she has had a mastectomy, and she has a broad shoulders and the jaw of a man, and she has a testosterone deep voice. The ability of this woman to revert back to presenting as a woman is incredibly hard. It's very, very challenging, and it's not working out well for these women. They find that they are considered male in the outer world and female among their friends. And so they end up having a very isolated existence because they don't like going out to the outer world, because it's very difficult because everybody keeps on saying Mr.
They've effectively been surgically mutilated.
Well, yeah, that's a harsh word. They've certainly been damaged by surgeons in a way that is unfathomable. You know, it's incomprehensible that a surgeon would do this, and yet again it lifts a spotlight on who are these surgeons and how ethical are they that they would do that to these people. And so we offer that kind of service, but we also in Genspect we offer the GDSN, that's the Gender Dysphoria Support Network, and that's we've run about 5 online meetings every week since 2020, and it's for families who've been impacted by gender distress, and generally it's parents, and we've 1,000 parents on our books, and these are parents who who are devastated by their child's complete obsession with medical transition as the solution to all their problems. And, you know, a very high number of these children have autism, ADHD, OCD. These are really vulnerable kids, and their parents are devastated. So we offer support for these parents.
If a parent could contact Genspect and get help, do you directly help the children involved?
No, we don't. We don't choose to do that. We could, of course, but that's not where we put our efforts. Our effort is in highlighting the issues with gender ideology, offering a non-medicalized approach to gender-related distress, providing support for parents, and providing support for people who've been harmed by medical transition. And we don't choose to work with children in itself. Like it's an adult-based organization.
Parents can find Genspect online and contact you.
Yes, absolutely. We are easily found, genspect.org, or you can, that's the easiest way to find us.
That would be good. Stella O'Malley, thank you so much. I know we've left quite a lot unsaid in all of this, but we've covered so much, and you've been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very, very much for this work.
Thank you.